Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome to the final session. If you're not a judge, you can keep your camera off, please, so it can coordinate with. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, second, there is another. All right. We'll wait for. It's just a couple more seconds. We're gonna wait for Zach and Chris to pop in. There he is. Okay. All right. I think we have one more person, Zach. I think we can begin. Thank you so much for an incredible weekend. If the judges want to turn on their cameras, but if they don't want to, that's okay too. Thank you for an incredible weekend of storytelling, of radical thought and thinking around what type of art is necessary for today's world. I really enjoyed the first session. I also really enjoyed the presentation. We have a World of the Year winner that we will be announcing towards the end of our roundtable. And I wanted to get all the judges here together and we can start the conversation. uh, I thank you for being here, and I think this has been such an incredible journey. Because for me, I'm thinking about this in the terms of like 5, 6 years of like since Syllable started in Washington, D.C., and now we're at this point and kind of really contextualizing the work that a lot of the creatives are doing within the lens of the industry. And I'm very grateful for each and one of you. I wanted to see if we could briefly go around and do a round of introductions. And then we'll dive right into sort of what do you see as good storytelling and how's your sort of background led you to kind of like sensing what that storytelling might be in that context. Whoever wants to start first, so I can call on. You can introduce yourself very briefly.
I guess I'll jump in and start. Hey everybody, Chris Hazenbush. Just gonna take my self view off so it's not distracting. There we go. I have been in this industry for a number of years, working in a lot of different aspects of the industry, starting in branded entertainment and working in agency representation, as well as scripted development at Two Pods, and now I help launch an international distribution company in the spring. So I feel like I guess to answer your question, Fabrice, um, I guess my understanding of story comes from seeing it from as many different angles as possible, seeing it from um, a domestic scripted world, seeing it from with elements of how is this going to sell? How are we going to send this to the right elements, the right producers, the right showrunners? How are we going to look at international? Does this have broad appeal? And I think ultimately what that comes down to is clarity, uh, strong presentation, strong presence as well, especially with CAA. I think the idea of the tastemaker is something I think about a lot. How are you not just creating a world, but selling that world, selling it convincingly, convincing buyers that this is something that will be a hit? And does that come from concept art? Does that come from, um, uh, just your presence? Does that come from clarity of the world? Does that come from an interesting hook? Does it come from the theme or the why now? It comes from all of that coming together. So I think of every element as I'm building story, uh, and I guess that's my take on
It's a good take.
it. Well, thank you.
Where
Tried.
were you at the beginning of my career?
Yeah.
That saved me a couple of decades there.
Yeah, right.
I guess I'll jump in. Hi,
Sure,
I'm
sure.
Cosby, Andy is what my friends call me, so everyone can call me Andy. Um, I writer, producer, started out in the comic book business way back when. That's what brought me out to Los Angeles originally, and I was a writer before then, but I was sort of a struggling novelist. And working for advertising companies and copywriters and basically any way to make a buck writing. It was a lot fewer opportunities back then. I came out to LA, met some people in the comic book company I was working at, which got bought by Marvel ultimately. And from there, I transitioned into film and television. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've gotten to work on a lot of original material, things that I created. Um, I guess it's germane to this conversation that almost, I would say, like the vast majority of the things that I've sold and that I've done have been original pitches. Like I've almost everything I've gotten, even when it's not an original pitch, it's me being called in on a comic book movie or some other property and saying, "Hey, pitch us what you would do with this," and then you get the job and you write the script, and then the rest is in the hands of fate. So, I personally think, yeah, pitching is one of the most important aspects of working in this industry. And like what Chris was saying, you do have to pitch in sort of a 360-degree view. You have to sort of think about all these different elements, not just your story. And at the same time, all those other elements you're thinking of have to kind of be invisible when you're pitching. They just have to kind of see in what you're in this sort of simple character-driven story you're telling them. They have to be able to see all those elements that you've kind of carefully sewn in, but those elements have to sort of remain invisible, which is the trick of pitching. Um, I also think one of the tricks of pitching, and this is one of the things that I've carried with me throughout my career. Not all writers are great at pitching. It's just a fact. And the great thing is you don't have to be. It helps if you are. Most executives understand writers are writers. We're like mushrooms. We sit in the dark and we we type things and we write things, and I think it's really important to remember that, like, it's not your job to act, but it is your job to tell that story. You're a storyteller. It's no different than you're sitting by a campfire, telling a group of your friends or a group of Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever the case may be, telling them your spooky story, your cool story, your dramatic story, whatever the case is. And that's the most important thing about pitching, because that's what people want to hear. Everything else falls to the wayside. It's got to be an interesting story. And the one note that I would give every single person when you're taking out something to pitch is it's got to be character first. The best way to pitch is especially when you've got a huge world, like if you're pitching Lord of the Rings, you don't go in the room pitching Lord of the Rings in a time of Middle Earth and there's a Sauron and there's like, no, you pitch a story about a wizard who comes to visit the family of a close friend, and the young family member that remembers him from childhood is stuck with this ring and now has to journey and become a hero. It's You see the story through the eyes, and you see the world through the eyes of one or more of your main characters, depending on how many characters you have. But introducing the world to an audience through that character's eyes, through that lens, that's the easiest and the best way to sell somebody on your project. And with that, I'll leave it to somebody else. So I'll pass it on to Zach.
Thank you.
By the way,
Sure.
Zach Zucker is like the coolest superhero name ever. Like, I don't know why you're not out there fighting crime with a name like Zach Zucker.
I mean, this might just be my alias, but
Okay.
that's a tough act to follow. There were a lot of really, really great words of wisdom there, and from Chris as well. So, I'm Zach Zucker. I'm a literary manager at a company called Bellevue. My own journey in Hollywood. I started my career in tech. I worked at Google. Came out here about 12 years ago. Did USC Film School. Got my master's. Worked at a talent agency at UTA. I worked at 20th Century Fox in feature development. Left that job to produce independently, did that for a little bit, and then realized that management was probably the best fit for me. And so been doing that for almost 6 years now. And my capacity as a manager, I work with screenwriters and filmmakers, and I think a big part of my job is finding the right idea for my clients to work on. I mean, half of the job is helping them get hired to write on other people's ideas, whether it's staffing on a TV show or rewriting or things like that. But half of the job is developing specs and developing original material to take out to the marketplace and try to sell. And so in that capacity, I've been very fortunate to work with lots of really really talented writers and directors and gone through hundreds and hundreds of ideas. And I think it is really challenging, when you're a creator, when you're a genius talent, to narrow down all of the ideas in your head and to finding the right idea, and sometimes you don't really know if it's the right idea going into it. And so, when it comes to, I'll speak a little bit towards the idea generating phase and then the pitching phase. When it comes to the idea generating phase, I think ultimately you have to go with an idea that you're passionate about, but I think you should also see a way forward with it. If you're still kind of kicking it around in your head and you're not quite sure what it is, then it's probably not ready for prime time. But if you think about it and the ideas flow through you, and to Andrew's point, what the characters are, what the world is, then I think that's probably the right idea for you to move forward with at that time. And then when it comes to actually taking something out and pitching, I wholeheartedly agree with what Andrew was saying. I think character is everything. I think being able to, create a compelling pitch that's not just plot, 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 but that immerses the people on the other side of the pitch into the conversation and makes them feel excited. And I think you're on the right track when you see the wheels turning in their own heads, and they're starting to think of questions to ask you because they're really excited about one aspect or another. But yeah, pitching is a very important skill. And Fabrice, thank you so much for including me in Syllble. This whole, honestly, like every single pitch was really strong and had merit, and there were great ideas. And I see the foundations at work here for these really talented writers. So happy to be a part of this.
Yeah,
I'll kick it
I'd
over
like
to
to
someone
say
else.
ditto to that. The really amazing pitches, really great talent, really, really fascinating worlds these people have created, some really intriguing characters.
Super. Yeah, thank you. I have so many follow-ups. I've been just jotting down a lot of notes for the conversation, but I'd love to hear from James and Labid. Feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and sort of frame around the types of stories that and what you look for in that process in your journey and how that shifted.
Hey there, it's James Lasek. I have been in the business for a while now. I went to USC, kind of fell in love with the storytelling bug then, and kind of just made a career out of it. I mainly focus on finance nowadays. Have a background in physical production as well, having stepped in to manage a couple of projects throughout the years. And yeah, I think I think the first thing I want to say is that the creativity and kind of like the raw ideas is really off the charts. Just in comparison to a lot of stuff that I've read and just heard pitched and all that stuff. So I think that kind of is like the foundation of what you guys have going on. And the representation, the diversity is also there. I think, we almost don't even have to talk about those things. I think we've been talking about the other things that are perhaps not as strong, which, it all needs to be strong. I see it's, you got to polish that rock and turns into a diamond. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is just like repetition. Is just, sorry, excuse me, guys. A lot of it is just repetition. A lot of it is, just being aware of what else is out there in terms of what's, what is getting pitched around town, what has been made, what hasn't been made. A lot of it just comes down to immersing yourself into like the world of media. And so that unfortunately takes time, it takes effort. But that's how you're going to become a better writer. That's how you're going to become a better person that works within the industry. That's just, I guess, one of the things that I would kind of point out. And that is, mainly how I've gotten to figure out what is good or what I think is good, because everybody has an opinion. It just has been like brute force. It's like, I've read thousands of scripts. I've heard, innumerable pitches, and that's informed my understanding of what storytelling is, because I'm not perhaps myself a storyteller, but I work with storytellers on a daily basis, and and therefore, I've through osmosis, because it is still almost an apprenticeship type of business. You learn what's good, what's not, and the nuances of why things get bought, because there are nuances to that.
So much, James. Yeah, a lot of powerful words everyone has been is speaking on right now. Labid, I don't know if you wanted to drop a few words.
Uh, hey guys, no, everybody's really, insightful comments, and I mean, for me, the easy answer, because it's all subjective at the end of the day, but number one, being a person of color, and having been in this business, over 25 years, this notion of diversity, equity, inclusion has just been paramount for my own narrative, and so I've always been a firm believer. You find people from different places around the world and let them tell their story. You're going to get great stories. So I love, echoing everybody else's sentiment. I mean, I love what this group has done, and I was fortunate to be a part of that early session yesterday and to be able to hear not pitches, but from just a brain power perspective, the people talk, and just seeing how brilliant the folks in the room were, and just leaning into why they're doing it, and that the why is so important for me. But ultimately, the end is it, does it move me? Does it move us? Does it move the needle? Period. Right. And so that from a super, and I'm a business guy now. I mean, I started as a doc filmmaker, and now I'm a suit, as they say. But the simplest way is, does the story move me? And even going back to what Andy said, it's about character. And what I always say to people is, I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and any father-daughter story I can and should be able to relate to, whether it's set in Nebraska, Nigeria, Nepal, or on Neptune, right? But each one of those is going to be vastly different because of the context of where you are. So again, just tell that story of the father and the son, or father and the daughter, and whether you're in Nebraska or Neptune or Nepal or Nigeria, it's going to be different, but it'll still have that arc, and I can watch it and relate to it, and I'll just pick sort of the mood I'm in that night. But yeah, super impressed by what you've done, Fabrice, and excited to be part of this, and hopefully future sessions.
Absolutely. I thank you so much for all the introductions. I have a statement to make, but I want to follow with a question. Like, I'm incredibly grateful to have you all in this space right now, because I think my sort of very my big vision is like to create a Disney-like entity or a Universal Studios in the next 10, 15 years, but that creates spaces for people from around the world to come together in their own worlds and create stories and narratives, something different, something that we haven't necessarily seen before. And I think for me, especially after the strike, there was a lot of conversations that like people were saying, okay, things are going to get better, like we're going to go back to where it was, but it seems like the bottom line and sort of the conversation around the bottom line is becoming much more like sort of, how do I say, rigid, where the types of stories that are going to be made or the number of stories are going to be pitched and processed. I guess the question I'm asking is, because we talked about this in the beginning session, is that we have this tension between the growth model of like putting out a film or putting out a TV, and then having clear demarcations of like, these are the measures of success for a great story or good character, because that's going to bring return on your investment, and that's also going to allow you to keep your employees who have families that depend on you. So it's like such a complex decision when you're in the seat at the table making these big decisions. But yet, a lot of the energy also yesterday morning was also talking about what is the magic of storytelling when it's not rooted in this sort of vision of growth, but it's rooted in passion, it's rooted in culture and mythology. So I guess the question is that I do see a lot of creators and storytellers that move to LA or from around the world that want to get their stories published in the publishing world, or they want to get represented by literary manager, or they want to have their stories produced. Yet there's only one or two or five or six types of, like, there's only a limited numbers of spots that people are gonna roll up in their slates. So my question is like, what is that conversation? And where the rubber meets the road between you have raw creativity, raw power, and you have, but how does that even look like when you're sitting at the table from an executive point of view, from a very financial point of view? Like, how do you wrestle with this sort of genuineness of storytelling, yet this sort of the extreme bottom line that is also necessary for this sort of machine that is Hollywood that has a secret sauce for the last 100 years. Yet we know there are sort of certain pitfalls, many pitfalls, but there is a tradition. So like, where does the rubber meet the road for
Grace,
those?
I'll jump in. I'll
Yeah.
jump in if you can hear me all right. I mean, Andy and I, and look, People of Culture Studios is exactly trying to address that, right? But thinking about it deeply and often, it's in my humble opinion, it's simple, right? I mean, to be a true creative force is to be allowed to be childlike, right? Meaning to not have any restrictions around you and sort of be in the playground and have that the mind of a child as you create your world without restrictions, right? And then ultimately the design is you need to have adults in the room that protect the children, right? To use that analogy. Unfortunately, as the strikes have shown, the adults don't protect the children. The adults abuse the children, right? And that's it. It's that simple. So we need better adults in the room. We need adults who actually care about the children, who will protect them, who will guide them, steer them, shape them, and then also give them structure and strategy, and then be trusted by the kids, by these wonderful artists who are allowed to just be childlike. So I'm going to say what we say at POC. We just need different leadership who's not afraid to take chances and who's going to act the part of the adult that is nurturing, protective, and helps guide these creators or these artists to a better future. That to me is a simple answer.
And to speak to that answer, because we want to talk to the creatives about what they can do. Other than like look for networking opportunities to get to know the business people of this, industry, the money people, like they're looking for creatives. They're looking for creators that they can latch onto. Everyone wants the next Martin Scorsese to walk into the room. They really do. But they've wanted that for years, and they've seen hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people walk into the room, and they haven't found their Martin Scorsese yet. So that's kind of what you're walking into in this business. And that can be daunting. Absolutely. When you were talking, it reminded me of Fabrice when I first started. I started in this industry by helping somebody else fix their script. I'd never written a script before. I had never even thought about working in film. I've loved film my whole life and TV. I'm like, any other film geek. I just came from rural Georgia. I had no idea you could like build these things as a living. I just didn't know. It wasn't something that was part of my environment growing up. And so when my friend said, you need to really consider, screenwriting, you're really good at this. I remember we were out. I used to read for a living. I used to like pick up scripts, and it was one of these things where you make a few bucks, but for me it was like I didn't go to film school. This is my chance to learn and get paid to learn. And I took him to this newsstand near where we worked, and there were all these script writing magazines, just a ton of different script writing magazines. This was like downtown Beverly Hills. And I pointed out to him the magazines. I did the math in my head of how many people it takes to keep a magazine subscription alive and keep this number of magazines. And I said, that's how many screenwriters are trying to break in, just trying to break in. That's not the working ones. The vast majority of those people buying those magazines are the ones trying to break in. Like, how do I have a chance? So I started in that same place. How in the world do I break in? Now, my buddy told me 120 pages double space. Think about that. So at the time I thought, oh, as a failed novelist, 120 double space pages sounds easy. It's far harder to write a script for me than to write a novel. But what I learned pretty quickly is the power you have in this business of competition. There's so much competition out there. If you think about that, you'll drive yourself insane. All you have is your POV. Your POV as an artist, what you bring to the table whenever you write a sentence, whenever you direct a scene, whenever you option, a comic book, whatever it is, your point of view, that's your power. That's your superpower. And how you address that point of view, how you basically translate your point of view to others becomes your script, becomes your work. And no one else has that POV. That's the secret. The secret is to adjust and to hone your point of view so that if 10 people come in the room pitching the same concept, yours is going to be different. And then you don't have to worry as much about, oh, well, 10 people pitched, an island full of dinosaurs last week. And so that's done. Well, think about how many people have pitched vampire movies. Think about how many people have pitched everything, superhero movies. Like, there are no original areas. People say there's no original stories. I totally disagree with that. Every story is an original story because the person who's telling it is telling it for the first time and it's their point of view. Whether or not it's interesting or not is up to whether or not that person's point of view is interesting. But the great thing about that is your point of view is actually a skill set. You can work on it. You can learn how to look at the scenes differently, look at the world differently. You can learn how to, if your instinct is for the girl to kiss the guy, have her slap him instead, go in the opposite direction. All those little things you can do as a creator, those choices that you make, those choices are your choices, and there's a million of them. And you just have to make one and go with it. And that skill set and that ability to choose and make choices over time becomes your point of view and becomes your ability. And that's why I would say to these people, focus on that. And again, I can't say it enough. It's character and emotion. I think Labid said it, like, stories are meant to move us, make you cry, make you scared, make you happy, whatever it is, move them emotionally and create a character that is either someone we want to be or someone we want to know or someone we're terrified of. Like, just create a compelling character to take us through that journey and to introduce us to your world.
Yeah, I really like that. When I wanted to just respond real quick, Zach. I think you're absolutely spot on around the idea. It's almost as if it's the idea of essence. It's like, what is your artist voice? What are you rooted in? What's your background? What's your history? Are you integrated? And it seems that artist voice is like you almost need space to be able to create that. And I like what you're saying. It's like you're kind of almost dispelling the sort of market factors, and you're saying at the end of the day, story and art and gut and essence and soul is at the foundation of what breaks through the noise of today. Zach?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, speaking to, as you were alluding to, the barriers of entry to the industry, which are quite high when you're talking about selling, right? As you alluded to, there's only a handful of buyers. We're in objectively a period of contraction, although everything's cyclical. And, I think there'll be a robust period of growth down the road once streamers are achieve profitability. But for the moment, we're in a kind of a weird transitional period in the industry, but there's still a lot of success stories and a lot of new creators that are selling their worlds, their visions, and getting things made. I think, to give some advice to, like, the outsiders who might be watching who don't have, any sort of tentacles in the industry, I think the best thing that can be done when you have that brilliant idea, is to try to pair with someone who already has that track record in the industry. And, the most common thread is you pair with a producer, and then the producer can kind of build out the quote unquote package from there. But it doesn't have to go that way. And so, I think if you can find, whether it's a producer, a director, a piece of talent, an animation studio, whoever it is that can align with you, that has those connections with those decision makers, those buyers in the industry, that's your way forward as an outsider to try to get your project sold and ultimately made.
I'll jump in and add to that. I think what everybody is saying here is incredibly insightful and spot on. So I think the only thing I can add to that is, again, Fabrice, going back to what you're saying, what's that perspective of the suits in the room? And for me, and maybe this is slightly cynical, I guess, but I think, especially if you're trying to break into the industry and you're meeting with people, you're trying to get those pitch meetings, more likely than not, you're not going to be going straight to the president. You're not going straight to the person that can green light, that can push through and has that power. You're probably talking to people that are maybe even assistants or coordinators, or lower level execs that are trying to find their project that they can shout from the mountaintops, at a team meeting every week saying, this is the project and I'm going to stake my budding career on that. And I think because of that, there are, beyond the creative, there are, as Zach was alluding to, these, kind of barriers to entry. And I think that's why he was saying building the people you're aligning with, building those relationships. So it's like, okay, I know this person is a trusted storyteller, high quality storyteller, great detail. You know them in and out, and this is a relationship business. So I think growing those relationships, in addition to doing the creative work, is also important. These execs are very risk averse right now. Zach alluded to as well. We're in a period of contraction, and big splashy ideas are important if they have IP, if they have big stars. Again, this isn't an end all be all. A great idea is a great idea, and leading with character, leading with detail in the world, leading with a unique world and a unique point of view is of course important. But I think pairing that with knowing the business, knowing what different studios are looking for, and when packaging, knowing, okay, I'm going to this studio, they're known for this type of project, so they can be additive to the project, I think is also an important thing to consider in addition to all the creative stuff. So it's a lot to do.
Well,
And I think that's,
yeah, it's like you have to like think about it all. You have to think all of it. And I would say, guys, with everything we're saying, this is the main road. There are a lot of side roads. Don't be afraid to cheat. Don't be afraid to, I mean, like, everyone's heard the story of Spielberg going on to I think it was the Paramount lot and just setting up camp in an office. Now, I don't suggest you try doing stuff like that. The laws of the world have changed quite a bit. But even me, my first script, I sold it to, or I got repped by Paradigm, an agency in there. They were kind of early on too. And the way I did it was because I was a reader. I knew that when a script, one of the worst things that can happen as a reader is for a script to kind of land and for the agents or the assistants to not know where that script came from. Like, which agent sent this script in to be read? Is this for Schwarzenegger? When does it need to be read? There's like a panic that happens. And because I had that inside knowledge, I sent my script to a bunch of agencies with no cover letter, just seeing if it had landed in a mailbox somewhere, nothing at all. I did the opposite of what they tell you to do. All that was on the script was my title page and then a phone number at the bottom. Nothing happened for a while. Finally, Paradigm, an assistant at Paradigm, called me and was like, "Hey, we have this script here from an Andrew Cosby, and it's not on any of our things. We're wondering, did this come from your production company?" And I said, "Who is this? How did you get my script?" And I acted like they're not supposed to have my script. No one, you're not, I didn't send this to Paradigm. You're not supposed to have my script. So of course, what happens is one of two things. Either they throw it in the garbage or they get FOMO. And they're like, well, what is this script? The writer didn't even want us to read it. Who is this guy? So they read it. They happened to like it. They gave it to one of their directors. Their director wanted to direct it. It was crazy the way it happened. But it just goes to show you, like, use the same skills you have as a writer for creativity and as a creator to like carve your road in the world. Like, again, your POV can be different than everyone else's POV. And to speak to like the world we live in now, get online, have an online presence. Like comic books, I mean, that's where I created my own comic book company to work in this business. Like, I got so tired of like walking around with great comics and trying to sell them to executives and having the executives go, well, I don't know who's going to watch a movie about a bunch of superheroes. And, like, I got so tired of getting passed on with these great titles. I had stuff like Road to Perdition. I mean, like all these amazing titles, but like the comic, it was just too early in the business. So I just decided,
Mm.
well, the business is going to slowly catch up. And when they do, I want to own a bunch of comic book properties. So I started my own comic book company. But it just goes to show you there's all these different crazy ways in. People get in by podcasting, by creating a meme. I mean, you never know. It's all about affecting people. It's all about finding a way to move the needle. And the needle is people's interest. It's just interest. It's eyeballs. If you do something online and it gets a bunch of views, believe me, some executive's going to call you to try to option that. And then it's your turn to say, well, I'm actually the writer and I want to write the script or whatever the case may be. But you got to look at this industry. I mean, it's a war. It's a battle. Dig your trenches, like get into that enemy camp any way you can. One of the things that we're trying to do at POC is actually change the studio system so it's less about building a castle that has all these barriers to entry. We want to be more about, no, we've got like this sort of open door policy. We want to be the studio that when someone gets off the bus with Mickey Mouse in their hand, there is one gate that's open. There is one gate that's going, bring it over here, but the truth is, there's tons of people out there that are waiting to find something special. And like Chris was saying, like it is a business of networking. It is about finding the right people and getting it in front of eyeballs. But that's, again, don't forget, finding the right people is really just getting someone to see what you're making. Whether or not that's doing comics, role-playing games is another great place. Like right now, so go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I wanted to I really like what you said, the idea of like when you were walking with the comics in your hand and then people were like, I don't know, like they don't like they didn't really resonate with it because I want to shift the conversation a little bit about kind of talking about the future of storytelling and the future of the industry. Because I think I remember I was meeting with Zach for coffee and then I was I proposed this idea of like, okay, what is like a world as a product, like selling entire worlds that has like Bibles, characters, or even the rights of those worlds that studios could use to create concept notes and stories and narratives. And it was more so like yes, it does happen, but it's not like something that's common because it is story first, it is character first. And it's like when you have these sort of new ideas or these new frameworks, and I really want to kind of bring back the initial conversation around launching the arts movement around collaborative sci-fi and fantasy world building to kind of address a lot of the problems we have today, breaking the classical view of the writing. So I want to position collaborative world building as that future, and but translate it into the format of transmedia. So I'm intrigued to hear from your sort of backgrounds, and anyone can jump in. Is like where do you see the future of the industry look like, but in the context of like artists banding together and collaborating and creating properties, shared properties that similarly to Syllable, but does that alleviate um like this sort of the threshold of access when people are kind of creating their own content but together? Maybe I'm asking a leading question here, but I would love to kind of hear your thoughts around the sort of collaborative process that Syllable has pioneered, but also like how the industry is shifting and creators having more voice by banding together to create in
Yeah,
that sense.
I'll chime in here. So I think there's a really, really foundationally awesome core of what you're saying, Fabrice, right? It's a new way of thinking. Now, the challenge is Hollywood is a super risk averse industry. Everyone is making decisions based on fear. And so they're very fearful of things they don't understand. And so what you're talking about is a new way of thinking about IP and world building, right? And creating these properties to be built on, Hollywood is exploited, but I don't like that term, to be built on and made. And so how do you get around this notion that they don't quite know understand what to do with it because they haven't seen it done that way before? And it's not an easy answer, but the straightforward answer is you demonstrate there's a massive audience for it, right? And so there is this notion, this field of dreams-esque notion in Hollywood. If you build it, they will come. If you create a property that has a big enough audience, Hollywood will find you. And so I think the best thing creators can do, of course, it's not an easy answer, but is to demonstrate that there's a sizable community that already exists for this property, right? If there's a big enough audience, I promise you Hollywood will come calling.
Absolutely true. Yeah. And the great thing is,
Well,
it
and,
doesn't have to be that big anymore. Sometimes
correct.
the audience just has to be loud.
Well, Andy, the example of SCP, right? So I think look, even yesterday's conversation, I think it's already happening for Greece, right? I mean, even by asking the question. So I think now more than ever, it's not the size of the audience, but the quality of the audience, right? And again, going back to what people were talking about yesterday, like growing that audience, and even going back to this collaborative notion of world building, right? Um, if you have the core base and people are authentic and organically grow it, you're going to build your own demo, and as long as there's quality there and they show up for each other and they are contributing, that the quality of that audience can then multiply with the right folks around them. But Andy, I think the SCP example
Well,
speaks to
yeah,
me for this.
yeah, absolutely. And it is about knowing your audience. I mean, that's the other thing is know who you're writing for, know who you're creating for, and don't feel the need to create for everyone. It is really, I mean, take it from a guy who's been doing it for 30 years. It is really difficult to create a four quad property. To create a Pixar level property, a Star Wars level property that's going to play to every single person out there. It's really difficult to do. It's also very expensive. And often those worlds, those four quad worlds, are incredibly difficult to produce. They're expensive, big properties. One secret as a creator, it's not a secret, it's a smart thing to do, is when you're creating, again, it's part of your POV, figure out who your story's for, like who you're trying to target, because there are great niche audiences out there. Like, when they made Twilight, they thought, okay, well, there's a huge ton of vampire fans out there, but they've also kind of getting tired of vampire movies. But here's a whole other fan base that doesn't necessarily have a vampire movie, so let's put those two things together. And you'll find that it's like music mashups. Sometimes you can mix chocolate and peanut butter and you get a great flavor combination by mixing the niche audience with the right property. And again, like Walking Dead is to me a prime example of zombies were such a niche audience. It's one of the reasons my comic company survived, was because we were struggling early on. Boom Comics was struggling. And I got a call from my partner, and it's like, I've agreed to do an anthology, and anthologies do not sell. I can't back out of this. We're screwed because we're going to lose a ton of money on it. And he's like, help me. And I went like, well, I saw a movie, on my honeymoon in when I was in London, and it was 28 days later. It came out a year before it came out here. And I've always been a zombie fan. And I saw that and I was like, I feel it coming. There's a big wave of zombie fandom coming. They're out there. There's people like me. We get fed a zombie movie every 5 years. So we're going to watch it no matter what. I mean, that's the way the world was back then. Now there's a zombie movie every 5 minutes. But the fact is, Walking Dead was one of these programs where if it had only appealed to the zombie audience, it would not have been that big a hit. But they used the zombie audience, they used that sizable audience to get them in the door, and then they built from there. And that everyone knows that. If you have something that has a built-in fan base, you're going to get the base level support. And that can be the number of people that bought the comic book. It can be, oh, someone's doing a thing about clowns. How many people love clowns? Let's look into that. Oh my God, people are terrified of clowns. This is a terrible idea. Let's not do it. Whatever the case may be, there's math and there's algorithms and everything that are on their side, but on your side, it's just a matter of going, what is the genre I love? Is there an audience for it? And how can I add to that genre? It's the Quentin Tarantino rule. I want to make the thing in the world that I love that I haven't seen yet. Just make, even if you love, like, let's say you love vampires, you feel like, oh, everyone's done vampires, and my vampire, there's not much different about my vampire. Like, there is, just find it and figure it out, because there's some way into a tired genre that's a new way in, and suddenly that tired genre becomes the most commercial thing out there. So when the old writer adage, write what you know, like, it's not really saying like, oh, if you're a skier, write about skiing. I mean, obviously you can, but it's bring what you know to what you're writing, because again, you're the POV. Only you had that terrible heartbreak experience in third grade or fifth grade or whatever. Like, only you had that. So only you can write from that. And that's what they mean when they say write what you know. And then you'll develop a commercial lens. And that lens gets developed by sitting and talking to your friends. Everyone has 5 ideas. You sit in your friends and you talk about 5 worlds, 5 ideas, and their eyes only light up on one of them. That might be the one to follow, because that's going to happen when you get out there in Hollywood. You're going to pitch 10 people. You're really hoping just one of them will light up. If all 10 light up, great, you got a bidding war. But that's what you're.
Andy, to your point, right? So Fabrice, I don't want to piggyback on Andy. Like Andy, to Fabrice's question earlier, I think that's it, right? This is focusing on those 5 people sitting in the room, creating something until one person's eyes light up, and then just leaning in and continuing and sort of again this notion of collaborative sci-fi world building, right? Sort of like make sure you have the right people in the room and just go make everyone happy in the room, and who knows what'll happen. Don't I mean my advice would be don't think about Hollywood at that point. Just make yourselves happy. Tell stories that excite the room.
Never think
that you put together.
Never think about trying to sell to anybody too. This is another thing. I know you're there to sell. That's what everyone's there for. And they know that, you know that. But the truth is you're not there to sell. You're looking for someone who will take care of your child. And even though you might really need the money that comes with that, or whatever the case may be, but that's ultimately if you're there to sell, they smell it on you and it already takes you from here to here. But if you're there to share your brilliance and share your idea and like let people see this amazing, think of it as like you're taking the sheet off your amazing sculpture and you're showing people your sculpture. And now you're talking about what made you want to write this? Why were you the person to carve this sculpture? Why is it important to you? And then why is it important to everyone else? If you can do those things, if you can create that connection, it's all about creating an emotional connection with your audience. And if your audience is one executive in the room who's barely listening to you and on their phone, don't look at that as like, oh man, this is the worst pitch ever. Look at that as the challenge of, I'm going to get this guy to put his phone down and to look in me in the eye and ask me what happens next. That's your goal. Like, look for that in these meetings. Look for obstacles to become opportunities.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because I think the early days of Syllble, and I think I'm still in sort of the early days, but a lot of the wrestling of being an entrepreneur, it's like you're kind of having to wrestle. It's like, okay, I have to look at these stories as like properties that could sell, but it's really shifted very radically over the last couple of years, where it's like no, I don't want to think about the outside world. I want to create a container, and I want to be present and do things well with intention and with care, with belief, and kind of cater those personal relationships very well, and do one world at a time really well, very intentionally. And I think that's been a lot of my practice in that process. And I think I want to open it up for questions. Maybe we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions for the people who are on, or who are in the audience. You can put it on the chat if you have a question that's popping in your brain. But I would love to call on James, because you've been quiet a little bit and listening. Because I've been listening to, I'm re-listening. This is like my 5th time re-listening to this book, but it's a book, it's a memoir by Michael Novitz. Who is Michael? Who is Michael Ovitz? Who founded CAA? So I've been re-listening to that, and then I'm also listening to Marlon Brando's like biography as well. And it seems like a pattern that I'm seeing, but it was more succinctly said in that book, was there's this almost need of like a profound believer in an idea or a project, and it's like each project has this sort of profound believer. So I'm intrigued to hear, James, like when you're in the room or reaching out as a financier to fund millions of dollars for projects, like is there an element, maybe I'm perhaps leading the question, but is there an element of magic of like someone's eyes rising and then becoming a profound believer? Or is it more so one person is like the profound believer that's carrying the project to the beginning and end that makes the money sort of happen? Or is it sort of the metrics of like, this is what the market says, this is the audience, this is what the character in the story voice says? Like, I guess I'm intrigued to hear like your sort of reflection as a financier around the idea of the magic of a person or multiple people seeing the magic of the story and believing in it, and then the tensions between the metrics that are very much bottom line, which is very much financial, in
Well, I
terms of
think, whenever you hear stories, because, stories, they're a projection of our dreams and, our ideas about the world and all these different things. And when you're kind of thinking about that, or you're like in a pitch meeting, you try to be pretty sober about the whole situation, because, they're there to get you excited. So you almost don't want to get too excited, but when you can't help but get excited, that's when you kind of latch on to the idea, right? And then you want to become, I think somebody mentioned this, like you want to become that champion, like who sees the potential in the story. So, you know, a lot of the things that you're talking about when you talk about not just writing, you're talking about getting all these things made. Like, that's the work of a lot of people. Like nobody can get one thing made by themselves, right? And so it's a team sport. You have to realize that you have to be really, really, really good at one specific thing. You're not going to be able to do everything. You surround yourself with a whole team, whether it's like a 3-person producing team or your agent or your manager, whoever that is. It is really a team sport. So you you know, I almost try not to get too excited, and a lot of that comes from just reading what's on the page. The page just doesn't lie to you. Like I've been in meetings where like people have been ready to write checks, and you kind of like then go back to the next day, you like look through the numbers or you read through the story, and you're like, oh, like this person is just like really good at pitching. Like he can like he can sell ice to an Eskimo. And there's people like that in Hollywood, because Hollywood attracts all sorts of people. And so you're trying to protect yourself from those people, which inevitably leads you to shy away from, other people who would merit consideration. So there's all these different parameters that you kind of take into consideration when it comes to that. But, you try to be pretty sober about it. If you get excited, then that's what you latch onto. And yeah, I mean, it's not any more complicated than that. You have your metrics, you have your different things, you have your experience as well, because somebody will try to tell you one thing and you'll just sit there in the room quietly knowing that they're full of shit because you have an experience that contradicts that completely. But you just sit there and listen, and you just kind of like let them talk, and you figure out, oh, at the end of the day, it's like, well, can this, given all the information that was shared to me, can this group of people or this person actually pull off what they're trying to sell me? And I think when you're kind of talking about world building, like one thing I wanted to talk about was kind of like the team that you're building within each world. It's like, like I think the pitching is a reflection, like your ability to tell a story is a reflection of your ability to execute in a certain level, which is why, like somebody said, it's like, being a good pitcher is a benefit to a writer, but we just want people who are actually able to deliver. That's actually one of the hardest things in Hollywood, to just like be able to do or deliver exactly what you say or what somebody needs you to do. And because of that, like we'll search, high and low for those kind of people. And that's really important. And, when you're kind of talking about collaborative world building, I'm sure there's, some people who are kind of like carrying more of the weight, and some people aren't, or whatever it is. Like, I just don't know the dynamics when you talk about that level of collaboration. I've also never been into a writer's room. And so maybe writer's room is like the best possible way to collaborate. I know nowadays, you don't need to be in person to collaborate. That's obviously like an old notion, but you do need to have like that cohesiveness. Like, I almost think of it as a startup. It's like, if you don't have like the 3 proper founders for a startup, like you can have the best idea in the world, you're just not going to be able to execute on it. So having that right team, and all of them being like A-level players or being able to develop into A-level players, is important as you're trying to compete with, people who are professional writers, people who have been doing this their whole life, because that's, you're not just competing with people who are coming up, you're competing with people who are very, very established.
Yeah, the great thing with Hollywood though is it does kind of have this history of looking for the next new hot thing. So that's it's actually one of those businesses where it does value newness and freshness, which is good. That's one of the barriers to entry that kind of gets pulled away. Of course, it will then like try to rob you. If you've never done it before, it's going to try to give you 5 cents for your script and convince you
Or copy it 10 different ways.
Yeah. But that said, it is one of the things that's really great about this industry is it does look for alternate pathways. because everyone, all these executives, especially young, hungry executives, they're all out there looking for, what is that podcast that no one knows about? What is that video game that no one's playing, but it sold a lot back in the day, and stuff like that. Like, everyone's looking for an edge. It's a tough business, and any edge you can give yourself, absolutely. And I actually think someone asked a question about that, like what are some of the formats that like comics that were once undervalued, but ultimately became a great place to look for material, and to the point where nowadays it's almost impossible to find a good comic property that's not already optioned or owned by somebody. And so what are some of the other underlying IPs? That podcast is a great one. People love a good podcast because you can look and see what people's reactions are. You can go online and look at the comments as an executive, and you can see if people are wowed by it or if they're bothered by it. There's so many great ways to sort of judge material now. So I think podcast, and I also think a big one that's coming up is role-playing games. I do think, even though Dungeons and Dragons has taken a bit of a fall, but like there's a lot of great properties out there, and Hollywood's now awakened to the fact that when it comes to world building, novels and role-playing games might be kind of a new novel, might be a new place to go and find a really stable world with a bunch of characters that is like lasted over time. And then you can hire a writer, or you can bring writers in to pitch on the character side of it and go, all right, what character, what journey do you want to bring to this? Just like they
Right.
do with properties. I was asked to do a Dungeons and Dragons series. You go in there and you give them the series you want to do, and you hope for the best. And it's the same thing. Like, find a good game, find a good collectible card game, find games that aren't story driven and give them a story. That's another great thing to do as a writer, is find a great world out there that has no character, and then be the writer who comes in and has, all right, in this world, here's my story. Which, again, I can't say that enough. Like, if you're going to pitch someone a world, pitching them through the character's experience rather than just the dry, let me explain how my world works, it makes a world of difference. It's the difference between me starting a story, telling you guys, oh, guys, let me tell you all about this insane, cool sci-fi world I came up with, and talking about the towers and the buildings and the past and the future and everything. Isn't it so much interesting if I tell you a story about like a guy who gets hit by a car and wakes up in this insane new sci-fi universe? Like, already you're at least like, well, it's all going to be new to him, so I'm listening through his ears now. I'm seeing the world through his eyes, not through this. And that's a bad example, but like, always come at things through the point of view of your character journey, because that's at the end of the day what your story's about. And be able to answer the question what your story's about. One of the most valuable questions an executive knows to ask is, well, what's this about? And how you answer that will probably tell the executive of how much experience you actually have and how you approach writing. If someone asks you what the story's about and you answer with a log line, that's not what your story's about. Tell them the heart of your story. Tell them, I want to do a story that challenges our notions of tyranny in the workplace. Whatever. Like, give them something meaty. Give them a hook right from the beginning, and then give them your story hook, which shows them immediately how well, that's a question I've asked myself before. I've asked myself, how do you live an honorable life in a dishonorable world? Okay, that's an interesting question. And now suddenly I have a cop, thriller that addresses that issue and uses that thematic spine. And now I'm kind of interested. Now I want to know more.
I did want to. I'm looking at the time. We have about a minute and our allotted time, but I think if you can spare 3 or 4 more minutes, I did want to announce the winner of this weekend's, like, or this year's Syllblecon 2023, and then hear some of your afterthoughts around what did that group do well and what did you enjoy. I think I when sort of going through the responses and the comments and the points, it was varied. I'll share it with the judges after just the total points for each of it. But everything that we've been talking about has been incredible. I think there's a lot of insightful things. You're sort of lifting the hood of the sort of the creative process of like pitching and packaging and framing and branding and connecting. but it seems like a lot of this is rooted in personal relationship, which I think is transcends time and space. That's the sort of unfair advantage, is like building those relationships. So without further ado, I'm going to share the screen to announce the winner of the 2023 Syllblecon World of the Year award goes to um it goes to One Humanity Writing Collective, who pitched the SS State of Mind. Uh,
Ah,
I'm so excited to uh, give the awards to this group for this year. They've worked incredibly hard. And I would love to just kind of hear some general thoughts and thinking around the world, and then like what you enjoyed, and just some general final reflections for the next 3 minutes, and then we can part ways and officially adjourn Syllblecon 2023 and look forward to next year with new worlds and new stories. Um,
well, I'll be quick because I feel like I've been talking way too much. This was my favorite of the pitches. I love this project. I actually like this was one of those projects that happens rarely where you go, damn, why didn't I think of that? Like, and to me, like their presentation was great. It was commercial. It had all the elements I look for when I'm looking for like what could be a hit series. And honestly, I do think this is a hit series waiting to happen. I think this is a JJ Abrams level show waiting to happen. Congratulations.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I also really enjoyed this one. I think for me, working in the industry, most of my success has actually been in the procedural space. So when I saw that, my antenna went up, and I, drew upon my own experience. And I think that's kind of what we're saying is we're as creatives, we're trying to find those people that understand and get the project and see the potential, like you're saying, that the champion of the projects. And for me, being in that space, knowing that space, I certainly understood this world. I really love the clarity of the world. I love that they were not just pitching it as a world, but pitching it as a series. There was a clear format there, with clear characters and really great exposition. I thought the element of the AI as the kind of serialized element of the show, I think added to the why now, added to the connection of past, of future and present,
It also added to
and
the pitch. I really
it
appreciate
added to the pitch.
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the element of that with the voice and kind of coming in was something that I've never quite seen before, and I thought that added an interesting theatrical element. That was a nice way in, an organic way in, into introducing the exposition as well as his character. And lastly, I think it showed that they kind of understand, at least in my own point of view, kind of where procedurals are now, with having that serialized element and not just being solely the case of the week. And I think when you look at trying to sell procedurals to streamers, that's something, or even to broadcast nowadays, that's something that's I'm seeing more and more of. So I think they understand what the market is looking for in that particular space.
Fantastic. Any other comments, reflective comments? We have one member, Elise Hauser. She's in the chat right now. But any final thoughts or comments from Zach and Labid before we close?
I'd just say I thought there were really strong elements of all of the pitches. I mean, I don't say that lightly. There's a lot of potential here for all five of these ideas that we heard. In terms of some advice for all these teams and how to move forward and continue to hone and perfect these pitches, I think like character is the most important thing, and it's the way into these worlds. But to Chris and to Andy's comments about why One Humanity ultimately came out on top here, I think clarity of vision, and having a kind of clear pitch in terms of format, and here's what this is, not just like here's a really cool world, but here's how I'm going to interpret that world and condense it into a specific format for media. And I think that is hard to do, but I think that's a really important skill set to have. And for some of these other pitches I really loved, and there's some really fantastic ideas here, what I would suggest is try to hone in a little bit more on, yeah, we had, by the way, all 5 pitches had really fantastic characters. So like that box is checked. So then the next box is, how do we hone that in a little bit more into like a more specific journey to tell? But by the way, like that's not to say that some of these other projects aren't doing that already. I really love Saudiverse and Blacktopia and like and the others as well. But I think just continuing to hone in on, here's what the show is, here's what the movie is, or another medium as well. I think that could be really valuable.
I'll echo as the last judge in the room. I think James left, but yeah, number one, I think just everyone did a great job and really thoughtful and building these worlds out. But I also echo what everybody said: just clarity of vision. Make it easier. Make it easy for us getting the pitch. Make it easy for us to see the vision and not have to think between the lines or think between the words, right? I think that's the simplest way to put it is just make our life easy by really painting that picture with as much detail as possible so we know exactly why we're here, what we're doing, what we're talking about, and where this could go. The pitch, the story, the angle. But no, everyone did a really good job, and also super happy that the one team won.
Yeah, can I have one more thing? When it comes to character, keep in mind it's depth over breadth. And so one small piece of advice that I think a couple of these pitches still, can hone in on a little bit more is, we don't necessarily need to be pitched every character in the world, right? Like we don't need to be pitched 12 different characters. I think when you're doing it that way, they get a little bit muddled in people's heads. I think it's so much more impactful to just focus on your core one, two, three main characters and talk about the world through their point of view, through their lens and their journey, and other supporting characters can be introduced through that lens. And so I think it's more
Absolutely.
effective from a formatting perspective rather than just throwing a bunch of characters at us to say, hey, this person or this creature or whatever, this is our hero. We're going through this world through their eyes, through their journey. Over the course of their journey, they're going to interact with, persons A, B, and C. Those are their allies. Person D is their mentor figure. Person E and F and G are their antagonists. And if you just talk about it through that way, it's way easier for the audience to understand.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely incredible. Wow. Well, it comes to an end, but I like to think all ends are beginnings. It's almost intertwined. I appreciate every single one of you, both the writers as well as the judges, to making this a weekend an extreme success. I think this is the second annual Syllblecon, and this is the most recent format and kind of bringing people in the industry together. I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of the writers and the creatives and the collectives have also been learning incredible amount of knowledge from you all. I'm excited to see the types of stories and new pitches and new worlds that are going to be born over the next year. And I'm also excited to keep the conversation going and seeing how we can just create greater alignment in our work and also in the voices that Syllable is elevating too. So this has been an incredible time. Thank you so much, Syllblecon 2023. And yeah, I appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks, everybody.
Congrats again,
Yes.
humanity.
Yep. Congrats. Thanks, everyone.